Okay. Well, hi, Mike.
Good
Glad
afternoon.
glad to have you here on the Human Experience Workshop. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And this is the Human Experience Workshop. My name is Phil Bride, and my guest is Mike Jette. We met, I don't know, a couple months ago at a friend of yours' house and a my brother-in-law's house. You guys work
He's more like a mentor. I really love your brother-in-law. So
mentor. Yeah. Well, he is quite connected and he's a high quality guy, one of the highest quality people I know. He's just awesome. Um, so, Mike, you have quite an impressive background. As most recently, assistant U.S. attorney for Arizona for 10 years, and in charge of in the major financial crime unit, training, and then you did some really interesting things, training and case mentoring in Pakistan and the Philippines, and really to strengthen their investigation and prosecution judiciary all around counterterrorism finance, anti-money laundering, not sure exactly what that is, and public corruption. So maybe we'll get into some of that. And then assistant Arizona attorney general from 2009 to 2014, senior litigation counsel in the financial crimes unit, and then deputy Santa Cruz County attorney in the felony victim unit. Lots of cases around financial management and fraud, all kinds of interesting fraud stuff, and public corruption, drug conspiracies, and international terrorism and money laundering. And you have a degree in law from Lewis and Clark here in Portland, and and an MBA from Thunderbird School of International Management, and a master's in international security from the University of Arizona. Wow. Did I miss anything?
no, I'm also a Libra. I don't know if that matters to you. No, I mean it sounds more glorious than what it is. It's just me just doing what I think is important. So
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, oh, I forgot to mention you've been acknowledged in numerous awards from FBI and DOJ. That's pretty cool as well. So what I wanted to do is dive into some of the most I guess I would say challenging, like things that just it's like almost cause you to scratch your head a bit, challenging situations, and it's like and how you came to deal with it. Um, a little bit professionally, but personally, how do you like deal with some? I mean, you've dealt with some pretty bad people over time, and it's like there must be a lot there that you have to personally deal with, and your team and everybody around. Go ahead.
well, fortunately, I mean we need to delineate because a lot of people aren't bad people. A lot of people make horrible decisions.
Uh,
There are situations where I deal with terrorists who have done some really bad things. I think deep down, I think a terrorist is someone who, for my core beliefs, is a bad person. However, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, and so it's a matter of perspective. But using violence to do anything to push forward your agenda is a wrong, boneheaded, horrible thing to be doing when you harm other folks to push your agenda. So that's how I think of a terrorist is using violence to move a political agenda forward, and that's what we call a terrorist. And so, um,
sure.
but in my experience, a lot of prosecutors, they can do a drug case. You have drugs on you, you have someone seeing you do a drug deal. Who cares? The issues that really bother me as a person are those white collar, when we think of white collar, the financial frauds, the ones that really hammer at the institution of our society, the ones that take advantage of our seniors, the ones that take advantage of people who are vulnerable, the ones who take advantage of just outright stealing your identity and then spending up all your money on your credit. All those things matter to me as a person. So that's where I moved as my career towards is the white collar. I mean, blood and
Okay.
guts are important, homicide is important, all serious, all very serious. But the more complicated cases
Hmm.
are your white collar public corruption type of cases, because those go to the our livings day to day. Because most crime,
Yeah.
most of that violent crime is family oriented, friends. I mean, it's not really. There's some stranger danger, Phil. However, a lot of that stuff is people you know. You get into fights, you get into domestic violence issues, you get into all those things. Those are usually people you know. Typically, there's some stranger danger. But when you talk about the white collar world, those are people. You got your phishing scam farms overseas. They're dialing for dollars. These frauds on seniors. Those are the ones that really irk me, and that's why I gleaned on as a career. So.
Okay, that's very interesting. And thanks for really clarifying your thought on bad guy versus good guy, and that it's just, a lot of bad decisions mostly, which is a very interesting perspective because it kind of changes the attitude towards things. I worked in with construction companies for several years as a business consultant with them, and we brought in a forensic accountant. And I had never really been around that world at all. And I was talking about a client of mine who had an accountant that was, a little bit suspicious. And the forensic accountant looked at me and said, "There's fraud." And it's like, well, how do you know? He goes, "Trust me, I know. And, if we need to, we can go interrogate the guy." And I go, "Not interview?" And he goes, "Why would we interview? We interrogate him." It's like, whoa. And then he went on to give stats, forget the exact number, something like 73% of all small businesses have some kind of fraud perpetrated, 130,000 in takes, something like that. It, anyway, I was kind of blown away by it. So tell me a little bit about at what point in your career did you kind of get pulled into it or pushed into it? Was there discussion or first, did you have personal experience with it, or what happened?
Well, I went to law school to become an environmental lawyer. Hence, Lewis and Clark is one of the top environmental programs in the country. And then, but when I got my MBA, my MBA focused in on finance, international finance. I started moving towards the financial world, and
Yeah.
I fell into prosecution, and a white collar case emanated in a small county. My very first prosecution job was in a very small border county in Arizona, and a white collar case came on, and no one had the skill set to do it. And I never did a white collar case. I mean, all prosecutors do your sex assaults, your homicides, your aggravated assaults. But here comes a white collar case, and I jumped. I say, I'm available for it. I know the lingo, and I'd be able to explain that to a jury. And because jurors don't typically have an accounting background, they don't have a finance background. So
Sure.
half your job as a prosecutor in a white collar case is to educate the jury before you even get into the crime. And so I jumped at it and loved it from then on. And then the Attorney General's office recruited me to go to the Attorney General's office. And from there, the DOJ said, "We want you into the Fed system." And then once in the Fed system, they said, "We want you internationally." And so this is how the progression went. Because if you do a good job, and if you do it passion and you do it fair, people are going to recognize you, and that you move this upward trajectory. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
Lucky for me, that's what happened for me. And so anyway, that's how I ended up overseas. But that's how it started with one case. How we don't know how the dominoes fall, we never know. But that
Right.
very first domino was a small little white collar case in a small little county, and from then on, I ended up 20 years later. I'm overseas in Pakistan teaching prosecutors how to prosecute cases and working on terrorism cases.
So now that is really interesting because they obviously deal with terrorism. I mean, the history between Pakistan and India, and the fact that they were all one country at one point and split and all that, you would think that they would be well versed in this. And, to look to the US for leadership, and then and what's even more impressive to look to you for leadership is very interesting perspective. Tell me.
It's not well, it's not about being versed in it. I mean, they're very familiar with it. It's a topic that they're very acquainted with. However,
Sure.
they're not very how should we say amenable to Western ideas of due process and fair
Mm,
treatment. And so that is the process that is soft power. And so if you want to do trade, if you want to trade with Western society, if you want to engage in our Western philosophies of how we open borders and stuff, there's rule of law you need to follow and how you treat people. So you may have even a terrorist deserves due process because you still have to prove it in court. And so you just can't do extrajudicial killings. You can't do extrajudicial runoffs and put them in a prison cell for the rest of their life without due process. So there's a process you need to do before you can. Some people deserve some heavy punishment. However, there's a process before you get there. So that is what DOJ sent me there. It's like, if you want to play ball with the grown-ups here in Pakistan, here are some of the things you need to improve. You may be familiar with terrorism and how to deal with it, but the way you deal with it sometimes, it shocks the conscience. So let's move ourselves away from, doing some bad stuff to people. And how about we move ourselves to due process? And if you want to lock them up for the rest of their life, have a finder of fact, a judge. In Pakistan, it's a judge. There's no jury trial in Pakistan. A judge will decide after hearing the evidence, and then you can punish somebody. And if you have the death penalty pursuant to certain crimes we do here in the U.S., then you can effectuate that sentence. However, let's do due process. And so that's the makeup of why you send people like me overseas, is to make sure we follow that due process. And I guess it's relevant today as we see it
sure.
today in our current political landscape. You hear the word due process, and that's a core fundamental belief of the American system.
So, and that's not a core fundamental belief of Pakistan or the Philippines, then.
Well, I guess it's how you interpret the word due process.
Okay,
I mean, everyone's got a different interpretation of due process. So, I mean, just like I just said, one person's terrorism is another person's freedom fighter.
sure,
One person thinks I'm one person, one country or one institution may think they're doing due process, and the other goes, no, you're not doing that. So, when you look at it from that optic, from our optic, now this is a focus from my perspective as a Western trained American lawyer, prosecutor. When I look at the Pakistan system, there's a lot of need for improvement because the way we look at it, they're violating all kinds of due process all over the place. For them, necessarily, they'd be like, what are we doing so wrong? I mean, so
and that kind of big takes me to where I was going to ask is you must have had run up against some pushback against the Americanizing of their due process.
you do because there's well in certain places religion plays a big factor, and so
Mm,
Islam plays a big factor in Pakistan, and so you have your religious doctrine, which is kind of like running simultaneous with the rule of law, which is an odd thing because we have a separation in place. We don't have Christianity dictating our American jurisprudence. There, you've got those two running side by side on the same parallel lines, which influence each other. So, but you do have a lot of pushback. But there's people in higher positions because they want to play ball in the bigger economy. They want to play ball with trade deals and things like that. And one of the requisites we've always had as an American society and our diplomats is if you want to open up with us, which we've got a lot of power, a lot of buying power, economic influence, and trade
sure.
issues, you have to do certain things. And one of those things is make sure your foundations, like the rule of law, is set. Now, it's a work in progress. Just because you send me out there for 3 years doesn't mean we've solved the problem. But it's encouraging that you've opened the door to allow people like me to go in there. And so it's always a work in progress, which takes multiple generations to fix.
Right. Okay. So, how closely is Sharia law built into like Pakistani law? You described it as parallel tracks
Yeah.
with connections, but like, how close is it really?
Well, my perspective. This is my perspective only, but
Sure.
it's supposed to be parallel tracks, and there's a different court system, because some crimes you can only bring in Sharia law courts, and some you keep in your what we call traditional courts, your criminal courts. However, it sure seems like that Sharia law, philosophy invades into your agnostic system of law. It sure does invade the core concept. So judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys will often use scripture, will often use stories from the book to influence this agnostic system. And because you're all part of the same, religious belief, it has a lot of weight. So if you find something, which you don't usually hear that in American systems at all. Matter of fact, my entire time of doing trial work, I've done about 150 jury trials. Never once have I heard, seen anything about using biblical verses or biblical concepts or biblical analogies. I've never once heard that. But I worked on a murder case in Pakistan of a U.S. citizen who was murdered in Pakistan, a dual citizen. She was a dual citizen, and sure enough, because of this intermingle of the two, Sharia law and agnostic system, I encourage it's the way it is. I encourage them. We found a great analogy in the books, and said use it in the case, and the analogy was perfect, right on, and that judge was very, very moved by that scripture story, how analogous it was to this story. And yeah, I mean, when in Rome, I mean, it's the way. You can't change everything overnight, and there's some things that I told them you can't do. I mean, some of their interrogation. So when I hear the word interrogation, I bristle when I hear the word interrogation. I like the word interview. I like the word interview. I don't like the word interrogation. I don't like those things. I like the word interview.
Yeah. Well,
I want to be voluntary. I want to be voluntary. I want them to say things. If they admit, I want them to admit, and I want them to feel like I'm not beating it out of them. Voluntariness is an important concept for any suspect.
Okay, that's very interesting. I want to swing back to that, hopefully, because I used that word interrogation earlier because it surprised me so much. Um, and your reaction is very interesting. But I want to stick with Pakistan for just a minute. Um, what? So, did you ever butt heads with people?
All the time. All the time. All the time. All the time.
Well, you're such an outgoing guy. It's like it doesn't bother you, or what? How do you deal with it, or
Oh,
what happened?
I think butting heads, you're halfway there. I think if you did, I think when someone expresses their displeasure, their dislike of whatever you're suggesting, I think we're halfway there. It's the worrisome is when someone just gives me a fake agreement and they go off and do their thing. And so I love the give. I mean, my job here is to convince you. And if we're butting heads, I'm halfway there, because now you're getting, now you're in the WWE ring with me, and you're body slamming me. I'm body slamming you, and pretty soon one of us is going to start convincing the other one like we are the bigger. So I'm never going to lose this fight, because I belong to a scripture of American jurisprudence, which I completely love and adhere to. So I think I'm going to win this fight, but eventually it's going to take me time, because the analogy I like to use, Phil, all the time is it's like a ice machine or a soda machine. You try to tip it over, and you take one big push, but you can never get it over on the first push. It comes back at you. It comes back. The momentum comes back at you.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the second push you push over, and you can push over the ice machine or the soda machine. And so I know people are going to push back on me the first time or a couple times, but as long as I'm steadfast, and you send people over there who've got a spine. I'm not saying I'm the biggest spine in the world, but you got to have people with spines. And so if you're pushing back on me, I'm fine. I think I'm halfway there with you. It's like me arguing with my wife. But that doesn't work with my wife, though. If I'm arguing with my wife, I know I've lost the fight. So
There are exceptions.
there are exceptions. Family and wives are different for me. So yeah.
So I want to you tell me if I'm going too far, or whatever. But um, was there any that were particularly challenging that really jumped out at you as this is one heavy ice machine, and when he rolls back, he or she or whatever is going to roll back hard?
Yeah, almost all of them. I dealt with the
Any jump out
Supremes.
in particular
Um,
that you could talk
well,
about?
not really I can talk about what, because I got the clearance, and so there's some things in there that
Oh,
are dealing with some things there. But when you're dealing with people who are very high up in their positions, they tend to have a lot of power and a lot of they got there for a reason. And so
and ego.
oh, the ego, yeah, the ego. And so so here comes to them. I mean, you always have to look at it from their perspective too. I mean, you really have to put yourself, you have to empathize and figure out, here comes this prosecutor, this hot rodding prosecutor who's white, Caucasian, coming into Pakistan. He's DOJ guy coming in saying, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. He's like, we've been doing this country since the 1970s, the Great Migration since the 1970s. We know what we're doing here. This is a great country. Pakistan is a great country. How dare this guy, this young whippersnapper, wherever this guy is coming in here, telling me what we should do? So that is the optic. I mean, I understand. I appreciate if someone were coming from Pakistan into my area, I'd be like, who the hell is this guy telling me what I should be doing? So I have to take that with a grain of salt. And so it takes a long time. And because you've got DOJ and because you got the Department of State, they're the silverback gorillas. And so as long as I'm sticking true to the script of what we're there for, eventually those people eventually turn. And so they do. It takes a long time for some. I mean, just like with anything, no one likes to be confronted, say they've been doing something wrong. So you got to be careful how you phrase it, how you pitch it.
Sure.
What are the things that matter to them? And then sometimes you have to flank it. Sometimes you flank their issues, and all of a sudden they move on this one. So
Wow.
I don't know if I
Okay.
made any sense. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but
No,
I
you
sound like a
are.
diplomat. I sound like a diplomat now, don't I? So.
I like the way you evaded a little bit of that. You didn't evade, you just can't.
Yeah.
Which okay, I can understand. Um, interrogation versus interviewing. So I'm telling you, this forensic accountant said, I call the local FBI agent and we go in and I go, the very first time you meet the person? She goes, yes, absolutely, the first time. And we interrogate them. It's like, you're scaring me. And I was really rocked back on my heels over that. And she goes,
Well,
with fraud, we've got her position.
Well, so as you explain, I mean, people have different. Everything is perspective, and so
Sure.
from her perspective, I'm gonna give her. I always give the benefit of the doubt. So I'm what I'm seeing, sensing from you is an interrogation is when I accuse you of something. Maybe the interview is not hostile. It's still an interview to me. So it's like a Venn diagram. Everything's an interview, but within that Venn diagram, that there's a little circle called interrogation. And the reason it's a little bit different is because interrogation, according to her, is I'm accusing you and I want you to explain yourself to me. So she's using the word interrogation in that, I guess, in that context where they're not hostile, they're not demanding things. They're just saying, you, Phil, did X, Y, and Z. That to me is what I think means is interrogation.
Yeah, yeah. And with an FBI agent sitting right next to her, um, that's got to be intimidating.
That's definitely intimidating. That's the whole reason to have the FBI. I always call it the silverback gorilla stand behind you. So it's always
Yeah.
intimidating.
It's
So,
like,
yeah.
why is he here?
Yeah, I've never had the power. It's always the FBI. People are more afraid of the FBI than they are afraid of the prosecutor. I'm like, I'm the one who brings the charges. Why aren't you afraid of me? They're usually afraid of the FBI because there's so many stories. They watch TV shows. They watch.
Oh, yeah.
Who cares about the prosecutor really? So.
Who cares about? Were there similar situations in the Philippines?
Philippines is a little bit different. Philippines, they're a little bit more. I don't want to say it this way. I'm a scratch. I'm glad I caught myself. Philippines it has more history of being more open with U.S. philosophies because they've been around a lot longer.
World War II.
We've got military presence in the Philippines, and so we've got a lot more stickiness factors because
Mm,
there's a lot more integration with the
sure.
Philippines, and so we have people who come back. There's a lot of people who live in the Philippines who have who live in the U.S. who are directly from I mean, a lot more people than Pakistan. We have a lot more people who are Filipino nationals who are in the U.S. So there's a lot more stickiness between the two countries, and so the Philippines are way more open. to doing things. That one of the issues I had in the Philippines was it's kind of opposite of the Pakistanis. Was Pakistan was hyper aggressive in going after people using different techniques. The Philippines were it was harder to get them to move to actually do the thing they want to do. They do have a history of drug prosecutions, which I didn't do anything with drug prosecutions. They do have a negative history with drug prosecutions, but they do have terrorism in the southern islands. They do have terrorism, which is pretty bad. And so to get them to move on those things, they're always apprehensive because of the consequences of what everyone's afraid of. It when you start talking about terrorism, your sphincter closes up. You start getting a little bit more concerned, a little bit more afraid, a little bit more. To me, they're just a criminal on a different level. They're using the same criminal elements of violence and the only difference between a criminal and a terrorist is the agenda. The agenda that a terrorist has is to make political change. Where criminal typically, not all, typically does it for money. So your cartels are doing it for money. Your terrorist is doing it for a political agenda. They're still killing people. They're still causing harms on people. They're still laundering money. They're still doing everything that we think of, but one's got a different agenda than the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 A different agenda, same tactics.
Yes.
Um, isn't the purpose then a little different? Because the purpose is a political purpose, which tends to have more meaning than just money. Money has meaning, but financial gain is about gaining something else, having the
It,
ability
it's
to
it's
do other
easier
things.
it's easier to combat cartel type behavior. It's harder to combat terrorist behavior because that's an ideology,
Right.
and you have to get in the hearts and minds of folks, and that's a societal thing. That's where soft power comes in, where America does the schoolings across, has Peace Corps, all those things, all those tentacles that we send out in the world matter when it talks about terrorism because it dampens down that noise about people being, they start getting angry about the world and they become internalized on, philosophies which are, anti-American or anti-Western. So, and it's hard to return them. It's hard to deprogram. Once you have someone program hearts and minds of a terrorist, it's hard to deprogram that. Cartel is financial gain. They have got families. They love their friends and they love their communities. They're here for money. And so that to me is something you can control. You've got something that there's a focal point like drugs. Let's work on demand. Let's work on closing down the supply chain. Let's work on the precursors to fentanyl. There's things you can do in the drug world, for example, that you can't do in the terrorism world because you never know when you bomb Palestine, right? I'm not taking we're not into the Palestine debate. We're not doing that. But when you bomb Palestine and you kill, I just saw on PBS a family just lost 6 sons. He's got 2 more sons. Those 2 sons, when they grow up, their mindset is going to be, I just got bombed by Israel. I lost 6 of my brothers. What philosophy do you think that young man has as he grows up? I mean,
Yeah.
and you can't reprogram that. Once that happens, I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to reprogram that.
So it's the whole thing about the demand side of the equation is completely different between criminal and terrorism then.
Yeah, well, you can't combat demand sec on the terrorism is how you fight terrorism is a multi-generational thing because it's hard to reprogram someone who has that ideology. It's hard to reprogram. What you want to do is prevent it from happening to begin with. And how you prevent it from happening to begin with is get people educated, get women into school, get women into jobs, get us all part of a multicultural union of a world. And once you've got those tentacles out there, it's harder for people to hold on to these really very negative thoughts about everyone else to the point where they build a bomb or they put a jacket on a dynamite and go onto a bus or go into. I think this weekend's Oklahoma City anniversary. It's
Oh,
hard
really?
once you create that. There's always going to be lone wolves. There's always going to be people who are just idiotic, dangerous people. They're always, but our job is to mitigate the numbers, mitigate their opportunities. And the way you do that is, I know people don't like when I say this, but I got a lot of conservative ideologies. But one thing is I do appreciate is having everything open, because when you have people who are part of the system, it's harder for them to get, you know, um, you know, I'm brain farting on the word here, Phil, but it's hard for them to get, compartmentalized into a place where they get brainwashed and hating other people.
Okay.
So the more they're in contact with everyone else, it's harder for that to happen. So
So,
more.
so what do you mean? Okay, more in contact with more people. Like, are you talking about people who are brainwashed or really pulled into an ideology? Um, uh, the implication is that they're somehow isolated from this openness.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that really where you're
yeah,
going?
you look at. I'll tell you. I'll have to give you. I mean, this is just anecdotal, but in Pakistan, most of the terrorism happens in the North Country, and the North Country is where Osama bin Laden was hiding from after the 9/11. He was hiding in Pakistan, but he was in the northwestern part of the country, which is kind of like tribal area. That area is closed off. You just can't go up there as an American or anyone else and start interacting with tribal folks. And so it's a closed off area, and because of that insular kind of environment, there is no exposure, and so an ideology can take off. However, when you go to Islamabad or when you go to Karachi, way more open, because you have Germans, you have Canadians, you have French, you have the US, you've got all these different multicultural people coming in, interacting with everyone. You're still going to have nutheads. You always will have nutheads. But when you isolate and you tend to have just one ideology that dominates, your view of the world as you grow up is going to be that world. And so if you've never had
Sure.
exposure, I mean, one of the best things about the U.S. we take for granted, unless you go overseas and you work in an overseas capacity, you don't really appreciate that when I walk out my door, I see someone who is Hispanic, I see someone who's black, I see someone who's Asian, I see someone who's from Pakistan, from India, from Germany, from Russia. We don't really appreciate there's value in that. There's value in that. So
And the value is the different perspectives, all pushing and pulling and
yeah, I love that, having those debates and having those discussions, because we get, hopefully you get better laws, you get better treatment, you get better rule of law. I mean, you understand some of these things. So that's my perspective, but just who am I? I'm just one person, and I've been colored by my experiences both here in the US and overseas, and so this is my perspective.
so okay. Let's kind of switch gears and go into the fraud stuff. By the way, what is JTED? The fraud. Did I say that right? Or the art museum, EGs, some of
Oh,
that.
those are examples. You got like a resume or some sort. So, JTED is a
JTED.
school. JTED is a school that they have a massive fraud, almost took down the school. Museum of Art was a museum that someone stole a whole bunch of money from, and so those are fraud cases. That's not even close. The biggest fraud case I've done had $33 million worth of fraud, and the funny part of that case is I am now best friends, not best friends, I'm really close friends with a defendant I threw in prison for 11 years. So the person that went to prison for 11 years and when he went to prison, he came back out and we connected, and I'm good friends with him. And so,
How
and
did that happen?
well, because we need to get away from this idea that, like Walt Whitman says, we're multitudes. We're we're not who we are in one specific conduct. And so this person had a addictive disease. He was addicted to alcohol and drugs, and he got onto it, and he was connected. I mean, he's got resources, and he started doing this massive fraud against a hedge fund. Well, I was a prosecutor who stopped him, threw a bunch of people in prison, including him, and when he went to prison, he sobered up, cleaned up, did a lot of good work in prison, came out, and is doing a wonderful. We met up for lunch, and the guy is an amazing human being, and we should stop judging people. People make mistakes. People make
Yeah.
mistakes. I've made mistakes, and for the grace of God, there goes I. I didn't. I don't have an addictive gene. Thank God, I don't have an addictive gene. I don't have crappy ass friends. one of my greatest friends is your brother-in-law. I've got great people who are influential in my life. And so, but some people do not have those things. And if we don't
Yeah.
forgive, I mean, the person served time, he did his thing, he owned up to it, and now we're beyond that. And now we're on to the next chapter of life. If we don't do this as a society, we'll never, I mean, we just can't scarlet letter everyone for the rest of their life. I mean,
Well, you raise a big question, which you mentioned something early on, which I'd like to touch on just briefly. But I want your perspective on it. You said, in the US, we've separated Christianity from the legal system pretty thoroughly. And the question is, have we really? Because a lot of the laws, aren't they based on Judeo-Christian belief system anyway?
yeah, yeah. We're not talking about the how the law, the imaginations of the law, but the issue that I have, I guess, is we don't go. The Bible says I don't go into court and go, Judge, the Bible says this, and so he's guilty because he did this, right? We don't do those things in the United States. We do
Sure.
it by evidence, by beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't use biblical scripture or anything. You're right. All of our stuff is based upon some kind of tenets, and ours in America is based upon Judeo Christian tenets. And I'm not arguing that. However,
Yeah, yeah.
we don't
Okay.
use it to influence the decisions. I don't get there and argue to a jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know you're all Catholic, and I know you guys know this is a sin. Hold this person responsible because that is a sin, right? We don't do that here in the U.S., right?
No, not
That's what I
anymore.
mean. That's what I mean by the separation of the two.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. What? Wow. Good stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to throw in that you think might be interesting?
You're ending this with me. I thought we were just getting going. I thought we were just getting going, Phil.
Well, I don't want to take. Oh, we can go because I've got. I, I want. I want to hear more about some of the. Okay, good. I want to hear more about some of the entanglements that got kind of complicated.
Complicated with.
Um, People like um, you're a pretty straightforward guy, and so you're a pretty straightforward guy, so maybe you avoid some of the entanglements, in leading up to a big case where there's pushes and pulls of
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
the politics happen, or
yeah. So
I don't.
I think I know where you're getting at. So I'm gonna try to encapsulate my theory of prosecution in like as best I could. And so one of the hardest things as a prosecutor. So people don't know this, but a good prosecutor will decline a lot of cases. And people don't
Mm,
know that because I don't ruin someone's life unless I'm pretty sure that that person's made some really bad decisions and I need to prosecute. I think of the collateral consequences of people's lives. And so we need to really be cognizant of that. So one of the things I do, because I know if I would go to jury trial, usually if we go to trial, the exposure for a defendant is astronomically higher than if he takes a plea deal. Now, I never want to strong arm someone to do a plea deal. So what I do in my cases, which avoids 90% of the issues, is I build my case and I do a PowerPoint opening. I have a PowerPoint opening. I have no obligation to share that with the defense. I share my disclosure, but how I think of my case and how I'm going to argue my case, I've got no requirement to give that to the defense. But I know during plea negotiation, the defendant is like, I don't know what the prosecutor has. I don't know what the prosecutor is going to say about me. I don't know what the prosecutor is going to do at trial. So what I do is I give my opening statement to the defense and say, hey, this is what months before trial, months and months before
pre-trial.
trial,
Okay.
way before trial. And I give it to them. And sometimes, one time, Phil, I actually gave the opening in front of the defense attorney and the defendant in a private meeting. I actually walked them through my opening. Take a plate, because now they realize I'm not here to be a mean guy. I'm here to say, here's what you've done. You teach me why I'm wrong. And listen, if I've dismissed cases too, Phil, I've dismissed a case mid-trial. I've dismissed a case mid-trial. And so that is a hard thing for a good prosecutor. We're not here to win. And that is the number one lesson I want. Just we're on prosecution, this whole thing. We're not here to win, Phil. Prosecutors are not here to win.
I
We're
thought they
here.
were.
No, we're here for justice. We're here for justice. And sometimes if a case is not there, you do not prosecute. Sometimes if you know, you don't, just because you sunk costs into it, just because you put a lot of time and resource in the FBI or DEA or HSI, whomever your alphabet soup agency is, just because you've got them all invested over years of investigation, if your case can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt, you don't go forward. Your job is justice. And sometimes justice means you dismiss a case, you let it go. And so there's been plenty of times where I've got a lot of constituents. I do public corruption. And so there's a lot of constituents out there who are demanding, you know, they want justice on this case. And sometimes that justice means I don't have enough evidence. I'm not going to go forward. Sorry about it. And so some victims are upset about it, but that's the nature of the beast. And so
How do you deal with the victims, or do you deal with the victims?
all the time, the victims have a right to confer with the prosecutor. And so
Okay.
my door is open for a victim because it's a traumatic, anxiety riddled event in their life. And so one thing is you don't play around with them. This is a dramatic time, but some prosecutors are uncomfortable with the emotion. What you got to do, you can sympathize, but you have to be honest. You got to tell them. And sometimes they're going to yell at you, and sometimes they're angry with you. But that's the first time they're hearing bad news from a prosecutor. So what the worst thing you can do on a victim is not give them an opportunity to talk to you. You don't know this, Phil, but the number one complaint with victims in the criminal system is prosecutors don't talk to them, the investigators don't talk to them. Once they report a crime, the conversation they're not told anything from a prosecutor. And most prosecutors, when they decline a case, will not confer with the victim. They'll send them a template letter saying there's not enough evidence, not sufficient evidence to move forward on a trial.
Wow.
And so that to me is, they just want to be, a lot of victims want to be heard. A lot of victims want to be heard. And so anyway, the one thing I want to emphasize is justice over wins. And that is, a lot of times that includes winning. I mean, a lot of times that includes prevailing in a jury trial. I'm not saying the two are not opposed. I mean,
Sure.
the two can coexist. A lot of times they coexist. However, the focus point of a prosecutor is not to win, it's justice. And so if I find out that there's an alibi or there's another suspect or I don't have enough evidence, I don't prosecute, because our philosophy in our system is we'll allow nine guilty people to go free because we don't want the one innocent person to be convicted. And that is a philosophy that everyone needs to understand in this country, that we never want to convict an innocent person. That's way worse than 9 guilty people going free. Way worse.
So is that shared by,
No, of
first
course
of all,
not. That's
I
not
can
shared.
see the passion you have for this concept, which is huge and impressive. So most prosecutors don't share that.
No, most prosecutors think they got the right person and they'll move forward no matter what they do. Yeah.
Okay.
There's I mean, it makes headline news. I mean, there's stories
Yeah.
riddled across the country on this stuff. I mean, it's horrific. You'll never see a story like that with my cases. So, like, knock on wood, there's not a single one that has a complaint for my case. So,
Wow. Okay. What about your team? What about, when you go in and you're dealing with the law enforcement, and you have other lawyers working for you and coming in, and there's disagreements and how to approach it, and whether plea or not, and how far, what kind of conviction you're looking for. How do you deal with all that? There's got to be a lot of disagreements in there.
there is, but just like any other enterprise, any group dynamic. I mean, there is always the buck's got to stop with somebody, and the lead prosecutor is where the buck stops. And so, you know,
Even with law enforcement and federal agencies.
oh, the prosecutor still controls because everything goes to the prosecutor. So the FBI can complain all they want. Usually there's a really good symbiotic relationship with the two, but there's always rubbing and grinding going on because the prosecutor sometimes will tell an FBI agent or investigation there's not enough here, and there's a lot of like, how can there not be enough here? We've done our job. I'm like, but as a prosecutor, I'm like, I don't think it's enough. And there may never be enough, right? A lot of cases go unsolved. We kind of know who did it. We have the feeling about who did it. However, we need evidence to say for beyond a reasonable doubt that they actually did it. And so there's a lot of cases that are not prosecuted, but everyone kind of knows they did it. But we don't have a standard fill of, preponderance of the evidence. We don't have this 51%, 49 in criminal law. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And so if I don't have enough evidence, huh?
I was going to say whatever exactly that is.
Well, it has to leave you as a juror firmly convinced. Like there is no reasonable. I mean, firmly convinced is. I mean, the best analogy is this. Here's the best analogy. Sometimes I've used this early in my career. If you have a cookie jar in your kitchen, and you go there in the morning and there's a bunch of cookies in there. In the afternoon, you go in there and there's no cookies in there. Like, what the heck happened to my cookies? And here comes your 4-year-old. He's got like chocolate chips all around his mouth and stuff like that. And the question is, do you know who ate the chocolate chip cookies? Yeah, because here's your 4-year-old with a bunch of, you know, chocolate chip stuff. His fingertips have got the cookies on it. Now let me change. So that's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's circumstantial evidence that he ate the cookies. Let me switch it up for you. If that there's no one else home, but that 5-year-old's in your house, and the cookies are all gone. Here comes your kid, but he's got nothing on his mouth, nothing on his fingers. Do you accuse your child of eating all the cookies?
Right.
No, you don't.
You don't know for
You kind of
sure.
know you kind of know as a parent that I know this is parent. You kind of know as a parent, and your situation is probable cause as a parent. But in the criminal world, you don't know if your wife had a visit over with other kids. You have no idea
Right.
what the situation was. Who knows? Maybe he gave the cookies to your dog. I've got no idea. But in a criminal world, it's different than a parental world. And so if I have no evidence that this guy, your 5-year-old did the cookie stamp, I'm not going to prosecute your 5-year-old. I'm just not. I kind of know he did it. He washed his hands afterwards. We kind of know he did it. I don't have the evidence to prove that he did do it. Versus the first one, he had cookie stuff all over his mouth and stuff like
Sure.
that. So,
Sure. So, okay. When you're dealing with just the general public in trials, people have to get um, they probably get upset at you for, family gets upset at you for going after the perpetrator, or family gets upset at you for not going after the perpetrator and their family of the victim, or on philosophical grounds. Uh, Tell me how do you approach people when they you could ignore them, I'm sure, but people who actually can influence and have direct access to you, how do you deal
well,
with that?
yeah, I think that the bigger that one scenario, one of those scenarios matters more times than not is like a DV case or something where
DV?
the DV, domestic
Oh,
violence.
domestic violence, yeah,
So
okay.
when the victim and perpetrator are in a relationship or the same family or
Mhm.
something like that becomes a trickier issue. And the issue, because it's no societal issue out in society. We're talking about a relationship, and the only reason it's even known to me is someone called in something or whatever. Because most DV goes unreported. So most of the time, as we speak here right now, there's hundreds of episodic episodes of DV going on in this country right now. It will go unreported. Sometimes we find out about it. So here's a DV, and you measure severity. I know this is how you do it. And let's just say the spouse changes. Let's say the female. Usually it's a male on female crime. The female changes her perspective. She says, "I don't want to prosecute anymore." And the reason is because if I throw the man in prison, he's going to lose his job, lose the income. They got family, they got kids, they got obligations, and maybe she's a stay-at-home mom. So we've got ourselves an environment here where the victim is saying, "I don't want to prosecute anymore," right? And so, how do you handle that situation? And so, a lot of variables go in there. I'm not going to give you the answer here because I don't know the answer because everything changes based upon the 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 ferociousness of the victim and how they want to prosecute or not prosecute, the severity of the crime, the actual impact, the history, the legacy of this relationship, how remorseful and how open he is for maybe some non-prosecution help. Like maybe some I mean, who knows, anger management or some other thing? Who knows the dynamics of everything? All these variables are in play. So those are very tough ones. Those are not just like the guy hit her, we're going to prosecute him, throw him in prison. We need to stop thinking that way because life is way more complicated than that. It's easy for me as a prosecutor to do that, but that's not just in our society. We're going to do more harm than good if we don't listen to that victim. We don't listen to the situation of what's going on. I'm not saying the guy doesn't deserve any kind of. I'm not saying that whatsoever, but
Sure.
we need to consider all the variables. In prosecutor's job, if it was that easy, Phil, you can get anyone to do this job. If it was that easy, where all you have to prove up is guy hit wife, case over. If that was how easy it is, you don't need someone with my skill set. You can go get a high schooler to do the case for you. That is not why you hired me for. You hire me to make sure justice is served. And sometimes justice is served by looking at the totality of the circumstance. And maybe there's an alternative resolution you can do. Because people sometimes make bad decisions, Phil. Because I've had a case where a husband did hit a wife. That day, though, the husband lost his brother in a car accident. Do you think the brother, do you think that husband had something on his mind? I'm not excusing the assault on his wife. I'm not excusing that whatsoever. But do you think that was like a one off episode? It could be possibly a one off episode. And so those are the things we need to consider, right?
So, okay. Wow. Um,
I don't know if that makes sense. I hope that story made sense.
yeah, it does. It's not, I'm afraid my familiarity with the justice system is traffic, stuff stuff like that, and yeah, and TV shows. That's the extent of it. I for the longest time I didn't even know a lawyer. Never crossed paths.
Knock on wood. See, knock on wood. That's always good, right? That's always good. Now you know one. Now you know one.
Now I know one. Yeah. But yeah, it was surprising. I never even met one before, but I didn't just, and to
That's
hear,
really odd because we're all over the place. That's really odd that you've never met. We're all over the place.
or if I did, I didn't know it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So this, my concepts of justice, and maybe I'm unique on this. Well, probably not, because my concepts come from popular media. And so how would you counter somebody who comes in from popular media concepts of justice? How would you describe justice to them?
Well, if you're basing upon popular media, it's kind of like reading a 500 word essay on the French Revolution. You're never going to understand the depths of the French Revolution until you understand, a little bit more details about the system. And so someone can write an article about what justice is in the criminal system and keep it to 500-word essay, but you really aren't going to understand all the nuances unless you've experienced it, or you have, like, right, what you're doing here. You're interacting with somebody who's been in the system. So my number one thing on justice is it's not black and white. It is a like a big stew, and you're putting a lot of variables in it, and you hope when you get out it tastes, you have a society that, it's like, it's
Yeah.
society has moved forward. You want it to be good tasting. Society is, it's like you're dumping a bunch of variables into this thing. What you want, and I've I've trained a lot of lawyers. I've trained a lot of lawyers, and a lot of people get nervous because we make charging decisions, and that
Sure.
just charging someone ruins someone's life. The indictment ruins people's life because now they've got this social pariah kind of view. People look at them like, oh, that guy got indicted over there. That guy is, don't hang out with that person. So there's a lot of social consequences that come with just being indicted. But the number one lesson you teach someone is be fair and be honest. Those are the two. One, if you're fair and honest, you're fine. And if you come from a good system where you understand what fair and honesty is, you're going to be great at this job, and you're going to understand justice. So when you read something in the paper, though, it's never going to be the full story. You ever watch Paul Harvey? I was a kid. Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. And
Yeah.
so there's a
Yeah.
weekend segment where he tells you some of the story, goes to commercial break, And then he tells you something like, whoa, 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 you told me something completely different now. It changes your perspective of the story. And he
Right.
called it, now you've heard the rest of the story. And so, unfortunately, people just see the first part of that story and they don't
Yeah.
understand how you say the rest of the story. And so, there's a lot more to it, a lot more nuance. When something shocks you on what a prosecutor does or what anyone does, you need to understand there's most people, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go out on a limb, 98% of the people who make these decisions, there is when you hear the reason, you go, huh, now I kind of get it. I mean, I agree with it, but now I kind of get it. Now the story is no longer shocking to me. It now becomes, all right, I see the nuance of why you made that decision. Versus when you first see the story, you're like, I can't believe he let that criminal guy go. Hold on a sec. Let's find out the Paul Harvey rest of the story. Because most of these
Right.
things, there's nuances to it. It's like reading your first thing is a 500-word essay on the French Revolution, but there's a lot more nuance to this
Sure.
than that. And so,
Sure. The
yeah.
peeling the onion thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but just being fair and honest is just like a scripture for everyday life, right? Just be
Fair
fair
and
and
honest.
honest. I mean, every job is the same thing. Every
Yeah.
job, everything interacting with somebody is just be fair and honest. I mean, as long as you're doing that, you're fine.
Wow. Excellent.
So,
Mike,
well,
this is awesome. What great stories. I kind of blown away. There's a
it's not as cool as surgery. It's not as cool as surgery. So it's like surgery seems
maybe
like a,
not, but no, it is. It, it is. It
yeah.
is actually very cool. You do some very cool stuff, and I love hearing your philosophies and your approaches through it. It's and the butting head where you're halfway there. It's like, wow, we're in the ring. At least we're in the ring together.
Yeah, when you're in the ring, you're in the ring. I mean, there's opportunities there, and people don't think that. They think I don't want to be doing this. I'm like, no, no, you're there. You're
Yeah.
there. You're at the uncomfortable stage of having some real dynamic changes happening. People don't like it. People don't like change, and
Yeah.
when there's grit, something's going to change. Something's going to start smoothing itself out, right? Like sandpaper.
Yeah.
Something's going to start smoothing itself out. So.
Very good. Love it. Okay. With that, I'm going to wrap up. Do you have anything you want to like share last thing, what you're doing or what you'd like people to know about you and where you're going?
Well, I one thing I live by is, I mean, ignore the people that ignore advice from people you don't ever take criticism from, and so and you'll live a good life. So if someone give you criticism, you're like that person's wacko. Never listen to him for advice. And so if, for example, your brother-in-law, if he gave me criticism, I'm always going to listen to his advice because he's someone that I admire it. So if someone is criticizing you, ignore them unless it's someone that you would take advice from. So I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
never take advice from someone that is you would never take criticism from.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. So
Oh, yeah.
there's some
Excellent.
little things like that. So and I surround myself with people that I take advice from, and that is who you surround yourself with is I you know is probably 90% of the. I mean, I learned. I mean, that's just the good people around you. So I
They
say
say,
that because we have someone in common, and so that he early on when I was first starting out as a fledgling little human being here in Portland, Oregon, he was one of the first people that really put a stamp on me. He doesn't know it, but he's a good guy. So
yeah.
that matters.
Well, we do have to remind them sometimes.
Well, thank you, Phil.
Because
I
he
appreciate
is.
the invite, and
Oh, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. I'm sure you're pretty busy at everything you're doing. I really appreciate it. I am gonna post this, and then we'll be off and on our way.
can you make sure I look pretty? Make
I
whatever social
will put
media thing you
rouge
do.
and
Yeah,
lipstick on
yeah,
you, and
perfect. Yeah, perfect. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. I do.
you're welcome. And this has been the Human Experience Workshop. Phil Bride with my guest Mike Jette. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Phil.